So, and you can just look at me. You don't.
It's a bit bright.
No, you're good. You're good. So you can just look at me. Naomi Klein wrote a book last year where she was talking about the some sort of fundamentalists who are getting into control, who believe that the end of the world is coming. And so, did you read anything about that?
No, I'm not aware of that book.
Okay.
So, and I have various beefs with Naomi Klein. Now, her original book, The Shock Doctrine, is absolutely brilliant. It is a superb book. Everybody should read it. And she completely failed to notice when it happened in her own country. This is the beef I have with her. The exact dynamic.
Because she's
Canadian.
Is she from BC or where is she?
I just know she's Canadian.
Yeah.
But when it happened in the West, she completely failed to recognize it and completely denied that it could possibly be happening in her own country when it was following the exact playbook she'd written in her own book. So I was extremely frustrated about this. And Toby Robinson wrote, he's a medical researcher, but he wrote a brilliant takedown of her current stance on how she completely failed to recognize this. And it's such a shame because
perhaps sometimes you're too close to things.
That's the thing. And when bad things happen in like right around you, often it's like the boiling frog thing. People don't notice it right away, and often they don't notice it till it's far too late and it's already happened. And that's pretty much what I think will eventually happen. So I agree with her on a bunch of things, and I completely disagree with her on a different bunch of things. She also wrote a book about how climate change was the be-all and end-all of everything, and it isn't. So climate change is not happening the way people think it is. There is no climate emergency, and CO2 is irrelevant. It's 0.04% of the atmosphere. The reason that they go on and on and on about CO2 is that you can measure it, and then you can use it as a control mechanism, which is exactly what they're going to do. So if you want to look at what actually causes climate change, look at the hydrological cycle, because water vapor is far more plentiful and a far better greenhouse gas than CO2. And then there's methane, and there's also solar physics, looking at solar cycles that drive climate. So if you look at Valentina Zharkova's work on solar physics, it's superb. And it explains exactly what's going on. And her prediction would be, based on solar physics, that we'll have cooling for the next 50 years and then warming for the next 600 after that. So warming absolutely will be an issue, but not for us, because we'll be dead by then.
We're here in New Zealand. Mm-hmm. Why did you move to New Zealand?
Well, I was invited to come here. So there's an eco-village at the top of the South Island, and they said, would you like to come and be here? They were thinking of setting up what they called a bioregional institute at the time, and it never happened. And looking back on it now, it was never realistically going to happen. But they wanted me to come here, and they asked me to run it. It didn't exist yet, but they wanted me to come here. I guess they thought that if I was here, then maybe some of my readers would come here. But people don't just uproot themselves and move across the planet without some serious thought, and often they're pretty embedded in their communities, and often it makes sense to stay embedded in your community, because community matters more in most cases than where you actually live, than the physical resources around you, within reason. But
so you wouldn't recommend that everyone just lift up and move to New Zealand then?
No, I wouldn't. And I'm not sure exactly how the immigration policies are working now. They're bringing in loads of immigrants from the islands and from China and India. I'm not sure how many they're bringing in from anywhere else at the moment. And one of the things that's going on with immigration, not just here, but certainly all across the West, is they're importing a lot of people who are culturally incompatible. I mean, I'm not saying Chinese and Indians are, but and I'm thinking more what's going on in Europe, where they had this absolute flood of people from North Africa and the Middle East, and Afghanistan and places, all these war-torn areas that the West had ruined, places like Libya and Afghanistan. So the West ruins these countries and then complains that people from those countries come over to their country. But what you had in Europe was an absolute flood of migrants, completely overwhelmed all the services, and almost all of them were young men. So these were not families. These were military-age young men. And when you have an excess of military-age young men, that's a recipe for trouble being caused, especially if they can't get married, they can't find jobs, because they often don't speak the language, they don't have education or skills. So they're there, but they're just kind of sitting around. They're not even allowed to work.
There was something like this in Paris a few years ago,
absolutely.
wasn't there? Where
The
people
Gilets
were
jaunes.
very frustrated with what was going on.
They still are. Like if you look at the streets of Paris, Paris is just dirty and gross now. It's been completely wrecked as far as I'm concerned. And that's happened to so many places. And I think one of the reasons that this is happening is to dilute the culture. They don't like a sense, the people who want this global village don't actually like national identity, a sense of who we are culturally and historically, where people came from. So if you just mix everybody up all over the place and send people everywhere, you will not have a coherent set of values, you will not have a coherent identity. And they treat people as if we were all completely interchangeable, just units to be moved around, as if it didn't matter where we came from, who we are, or anything. And they're not just doing this at the national level, they're doing it at the level of the individual as well. If you look at what's happening with the trans agenda, that was all top down. It was funded by the Koch brothers. So you take these young kids and you ask them what their pronouns are when they're 4 years old, when they have no idea what you're even talking about. And then by the time they're teenagers, you're lopping off body parts and putting them on cross-sex hormones. What this does is it completely destroys any sense of identity. And if you can ruin people's sense of identity, you can manipulate them because they can no longer tell the difference between truth and lies. So and they're also picking on the most vulnerable people. If you go into a psychiatrist and you have gender dysphoria, but you might also have autism or depression or ADHD, all sorts of other things, they'll only focus on the gender dysphoria and they'll say, oh, the solution to all your other problems is to lop off body parts and take cross-sex hormones. As far as I'm concerned, this is absolute child abuse. This is a crime against humanity. Like, if somebody wants to do that when they're older, when they're an adult, they perfectly have the right to make their own decisions. I have zero problem with that whatsoever.
Florida recently passed a law which required people to be 18 or 21 or something before such a surgery would be approved.
I would say that's the absolute bare minimum. Like, if you look at the drugs they're giving these kids, puberty blockers, they're the same drugs they use for chemical castration of prisoners. This doesn't just stop the development of the body, it stops the development of the brain. These people will be stuck in permanent adolescence. Like, this is a horrible, ghastly thing to do to people, but it makes them extremely manipulatable because they don't even know who they are anymore. It's ghastly, but they want to turn the young people into a new Red Guard. Do those words mean something?
Remind me, Red Guard.
Mao Zedong, China.
Okay.
So what he did is he had a cult of personality, like Trump does today. He completely brainwashed the young people and then set them loose on the country. They were able to just hop on a train, go anywhere they wanted, and their task was to destroy everything old, destroy every aspect of the culture, take people, intellectuals, out of their houses, beat them up, call them reactionaries, and just to impose this extremely strict version of communism.
What years are we talking about here?
60s.
Okay.
So quite a long time ago. But he created the Red Guard out of the entire youth of China at the time and sicked them on the rest of the country. And they were told that their parents and their grandparents were bad, that they were reactionaries from the previous era, they were anti-communist, and they had to be taken down. Even just wearing a pair of glasses was enough to get you called a stinking intellectual. So when you brainwash a whole group of people, and they're doing this, they're trying to get the young people to hate the older generations. And one of the ways they're doing this is by pumping them full of terror about climate change. So they're telling them, your parents' generation, they did all this, and now the whole world is going to be destroyed, and the sea level's going to rise umpteen meters in 50 years. And it's not. This is not true. It's absolutely false. But they're using it as a cudgel to get the younger people to beat up on the older people. We have the cultural memory. We remember what was normal, the way the world used to be. So we have to be kind of shuffled off this mortal coil so that they can just have their nice manipulatable group of people. And it's not just done psychologically, it's also done physically. One of the things that these shots do is they punch the lipid nanoparticles, they're positively charged. They will cross the blood-brain barrier because they're lipids. All the barriers in the body are lipid. So if you put something in a lipid packet, it will cross the blood-brain barrier. Punch holes in the blood-brain barrier, then you're getting mRNA in there, then you're getting infiltration of white blood cells, for instance. You're getting immunological infiltration into the brain. This causes brain inflammation. One of the things that happens when you cause brain inflammation in the hippocampus, which is the store of memories, is you can no longer make index neurons. So if you can't produce new index neurons, your body will repurpose an old one. In other words, you're erasing your past. Now, if you're 70, you've probably got a lot of past to go before you'd even notice. If you're 5 when this happens, you're never going to be able to establish...
You're suggesting a certain food? Or
not food, injections.
Injections,
the COVID shots.
I see.
Specifically the COVID shots. Because they are so awful. They have zero therapeutic value. They do not stop transmission. They do not prevent disease. They don't prevent death. They are purely a bioweapon. And they cause horrendous effects in the body. They really do. And in the brain. The neurological effects are enormous. Nerve cells have to maintain, I think it's a 70 milliamp negative charge across the membrane in order to send nerve impulses down the axons. And then you put cationic lipid nanoparticles in there, like positively charged. You're going to destroy the nervous system. This is horrendous. These lipid nanoparticles have a black box warning. They were only supposed to ever be used as a one-off if someone had brain cancer that you couldn't get to in any other way. So you were supposed to take medicine encased in these, which would be the only way to get anything into the brain. But you would only do it once because the effect is bad. But now it's happening all the time. People are getting multiple of these shots. I have a very interesting book by Dr. Michael Nels. He explains all of this. He's an immunologist, a neurologist. He's absolutely brilliant. So his book is The Indoctrinated Brain, and it's not about propaganda. It's about biology and immunology. And it's absolutely superb. I really suggest that people follow some of his lectures as well. There's so many books on all of this. I have all of them. I've been following all of this. I've read every medical paper. I know exactly how to treat this. I know exactly the pathophysiology of the disease and the vaccines. And I could explain it in exhaustive detail, but people mostly don't listen because they've been very, very brainwashed about this.
Well, I imagine that there are people that you have to start where they're at. So let's start where we're at with news. So news right now, we're at the end of July 2025. News right now seems to be a lot about Israel and Gaza.
Mm-hmm. There's a great deal about that. So Israel is committing genocide. It's absolutely obvious. It's on our screens every single day.
Well, and some countries seem to be recognizing that, and some seem to not be recognizing that.
Even the ones that are kind of recognizing it in Europe are only doing so because it's become so obvious that these people are being starved to death, that their people are going to overthrow the governments if the governments don't start saying something about it. But the governments aren't going to do anything about it. They're just going to speak fine words to try and pacify their population.
Now, it appears that in Gaza, people used to live throughout Gaza, but then the Israelis have basically destroyed everything starting from northern Gaza going all the way to southern Gaza, so that there's really no place, there's no homes, no businesses,
there's nothing.
And there's not even people there. So it's like a no man's land.
Well, there are people, but they're underground. They're in the tunnels, and they're ambushing the IDF at every opportunity.
The IDF is the
Israeli
military
Defense Force. So they pop out of a tunnel, fire a homemade RPG at a Merkava tank, and blow it up. Or they wait for the IDF to walk into a building, and they mine the building, and then they just take out 20 of them at a time. So the IDF is withdrawing from Gaza at the moment because they're taking massive casualties. And also, the people who are there are getting PTSD on a wide scale because they're seeing what they're doing, and they're seeing what's being done in their name. And it's just destroying them
You're
psychologically.
talking about the Israeli
Jewish
soldiers.
people, yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a limit to what you can do and you can watch being done in your name before you just start to lose your sense of self. They lost their humanity. The whole country's lost its humanity. It's in the grip of something called a mass formation psychosis.
Mass formation?
Yes.
Psychosis?
So this is the kind of cults of personality are mass formations, but there are others as well. So what happened in Nazi Germany was a mass formation. So it's like mass hypnosis. So the preconditions for a mass formation are atomized society, loss of meaning, free-floating anxiety, free-floating anger, and all of those apply to the West in spades. So when you get a situation like that, if there's a threat that's presented and then a solution, if the threat is sufficiently severe, people will glom onto that solution as if it was the only thing in the world that mattered.
As in, let's just erase Gaza and take it over?
Well, 80% of the Israelis believe in what Netanyahu is doing. They don't like Netanyahu. They would like him to leave. But they believe in what he's doing because they mostly have no idea what's happening in Gaza. They don't understand the extent of it. But they're doing things like taking school trips to just outside Gaza. So the kids can watch on a telescope what's happening. The buildings are blowing up and things like that. And they are so into it because to them, the mere existence of Palestinians is an existential threat to them. So the solution to them, the final solution, and I use those words very deliberately, is to just eliminate all the Gazans and all the ones on the West Bank as well. They're taking over the West Bank too.
It seems like the Knesset voted yesterday or the day before that the West Bank should just become part of Israel.
Oh yeah, they've annexed it formally. And they're expelling the Palestinians. They're mostly killing them and just knocking their houses down, chopping down their olive trees and things like that, leaving them no way to support themselves. And it's not just an anti-Muslim thing, because quite a few Palestinians are Christian. But it doesn't matter. They're Arabs. They're dispensable. They're not human as far as the Israelis are concerned.
The Pope seemed rather frustrated the other day when the Israelis had attacked a church in Gaza, a Catholic church.
Yeah.
And like a Catholic priest and Eastern Orthodox priest went to the location in Gaza to see what was going on or something. So, is the Catholic Church taking sides really, or no?
Not to the extent that they should be, but then they didn't in World War II either. They didn't really say anything about the genocide of the Jews at the time. So I don't have a whole lot of respect for organized religion of pretty much any kind. I mean, people's individual spirituality is worthy of respect, but organized religion is far too often a mask for corruption and things like that. So I just don't really want anything to do with any of it.
Why is it that the U.S. is so, and many of the countries are so determined to support Israel both with words and with money and arms and everything? I mean, it seems so far away. There must be a reason for it.
It's the unsinkable aircraft carrier of empire. So it was put in place under the Balfour Declaration. So what they wanted...
This is 48 something?
Yeah. What they wanted was a population in the Middle East that would be extremely cohesive and would defend the area against the people who live there. And they didn't do it because they cared about the Jews. They just thought, the Jews fit that sort of description, so we'll send them there. They originally thought of sending them to Madagascar, but they ended up sending them to Palestine. And then you had the Nakba, which was just the elimination of Palestinians, driving them off their land. They called it a land without a people without a land for a land without a people. But there were millions of people there. This was not terra nullius at all. So they just expelled the Palestinians and killed enormous numbers of them. Shoved them into the West Bank and Gaza.
I read that it was kind of Truman who approved the whole plan. Does that make sense or no?
That's entirely possible. It wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. I think it was the Brits more than anything else. The Brits actually are very nefarious people, and I say that as a Brit, so I can say that. They call Britain Perfidious Albion for a reason.
Were you born in the UK?
Yes, I was.
Okay.
But I moved to Canada when I was 4.
Okay.
So And then I lived in the UK again for another 12 years as an adult, and all my kids were born in the UK as well.
So
I've bounced around a lot.
Dual citizen then?
Triple citizen.
You're a triple citizen. You can go live in 3 different countries. Well, that's nice.
Yeah, it used to get me all of North America, all of Europe, and all of Australasia. But since Brexit, I don't get the rest of Europe anymore.
So,
God doesn't anymore either, because Germany doesn't do dual citizenship. So he had to give up his German citizenship to be Kiwi.
interesting.
So he has just the one citizenship. But Canada and the UK don't care. You can have as many as you want.
So projecting forward from 2025, what's going to happen with Israel and Palestine?
I doubt very much Israel will continue to exist.
Why is that?
A lot of people are emigrating. So there's 9 million people.
People are leaving.
Yeah, there were 9 million people in Israel. I think about 7 million of them are Jews. And between 1 and 2 million of them have already left because it's obviously unsafe. And many of them, they have dual citizenship. A lot of them came from the US or Europe. They're just going back home.
Unsafe because of the Palestinians?
Unsafe because of Iran. because of the fact that they have taken on a 7-front war. 9 million people have taken on a 7-front war against all their neighbors. They bombed Syria and Lebanon and Gaza and the West Bank and Iran and Yemen, and Iraq. They're just bombing everybody at will. They completely took down Syria. Now they're invading Syria from the south. Syria has been completely dismembered between Turkey and Israel and the Kurds in the east. So it's just being completely destroyed. The person they put in charge of Syria is a head-chopping Al-Qaeda leader who's now massacring the Alawites and the Druze and the Christians because he's a Sunni extremist. So this is just going to lead to massive bloodshed and civil war in Syria. And Turkey and Israel may well come to blows because Israel and Turkey both want Damascus. So Erdogan in Turkey is trying to recreate the Ottoman Empire. So he's sort of sitting on the fence. He's a member of NATO, but naturally they should gravitate to the east. That's really where their future would lie. But he's trying to play both sides against the other. And at the moment, he's allied with Israel and Azerbaijan. So Azeri oil is going through Turkey to power Israel. And Azerbaijan, which is a mafia state, is being encouraged to attack Iran and Russia. So it lies between the two. And there's this Turkic swath going eastwards, all the way to eastern China, to Xinjiang province. And he's trying to unite all the Turkic peoples, which would allow people to attack Russia from the south, because that's kind of Russia's soft underbelly. And the empire, the US empire and NATO and everything, is trying to encourage Georgia to have a color revolution and encourage Azerbaijani mafia to do things in Russia as well. So Russia's being encircled and just being attacked from all sides. The provocations never cease. And Russia has so far been incredibly patient. They have not retaliated. They could have. They have every reason to have done so. But they're trying to avoid a nuclear war. NATO seems to want one, which is just horrific. You can't win a nuclear war, but they seem to think that you can. When they talk about, well, maybe we'll just use a few tactical nukes. 50 megatons. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 15 megatons. Tactical nukes are not small bombs. And they're the smallest ones they use now, but they're not small. They're vastly bigger than what was dropped on Japan. And they have much, much bigger ones than that. Russia has the dead hand system, which means if their leadership is decapitated, everything fires automatically, and we're all dead. So this could not be a more dangerous situation right now. NATO is insisting on the strategic defeat of Russia, and the strategic defeat of Russia is exactly what will get the entire world nuked. The defeat of Israel would also get the world nuked, or at least an awful lot of it. Israel doesn't have anything like the number of nukes that Russia has. But a lot of those nukes are aimed at European capitals. So this is one reason that they support Israel, because Israel could destroy their countries.
So it's not lobbyists or something like that.
Well, there's elements of that as well. But I find it particularly awful what Germany is doing, because Germany is absolutely supporting Israel and supporting the genocide in every way they possibly can. It's like, did you people learn nothing from your own history? You know, you did this yourselves, and now you're supporting somebody else doing it out of some kind of misplaced guilt. It's like you think that you're going to assuage the guilt of what you did by allowing somebody else to do it? Like, and Friedrich Merz, as far as I'm concerned, is essentially a Nazi. So I am very displeased with the leadership of Europe. The leadership in pretty much every single country in Europe is pathetic. And I have no respect for the leadership in North America either. On either side, basically they're all bought and paid for one way or another. I mean, Carney comes across in Canada, comes across as this, shucks, I'm a good guy, and he's a banker. He's a Goldman Sachs guy. He's absolutely at the top levels of the World Economic Forum. He is a globalist through and through. He is going to impose on Canada all kinds of horrendous things. And so he's part of the sort of European group, the World Economic Forum group. And then there's the American oligarchs on the other side. They're both fighting for control of the globalist project. Neither side cares about ordinary people. They just want to control everyone and run everything for their own benefit. Because the oligarchs ended up with more money than governments, and so billionaires dictate global policies at the moment, with no regard whatsoever for ordinary human beings. It really is absolutely tragic.
It makes me think about the U.S. Congress and how the Congress over the past 20, 50 years has become much less of a deliberative body. And I mean, now it seems like they only pass a bill or two per year that is primarily a massive thing that is a party line vote.
Everything's party line. There is no bipartisanship whatsoever anymore. In fact, I posted a picture on my Facebook page this morning, and it was making a comparison between the Congress and sea cucumbers. So these
sea
things...
cucumbers?
They float
they're
around.
They're animals, but they don't...
They find a rock.
Yeah.
And then, once they've found a rock, they've found a permanent home, they dissolve their own brain because they don't need it anymore. And once you get into Congress, you don't have to think. You just have to vote along party lines. That's all you're required to do. Absolutely no thinking. They don't even read the bills. Mostly they can't. Things like the bill they recently voted on, this disgusting bill that Trump passed, it was like over 1,000 pages long. They weren't even allowed to read it before it's not that they chose not to, although they probably would have chosen not to. They couldn't. They were not allowed to read it. They were just told they had to vote on it.
I think some of us had hope that it would fail because there was like Murkowski and a few of the other Republicans, and they seemed to be holdouts, and they stayed all night over, and then in the morning Murkowski ended up voting in favor of it, and then J.D. Vance came in, and it was 51-50 or something like that.
Yeah, Murkowski caved because she got her carve out for Alaska.
All right.
And she said she was looking after the people of Alaska. So the carve-out was about not having work requirements for Medicaid recipients in Alaska, just because there's not a lot of work on things, so it really wouldn't be physically possible. Plus, there's a lot of Medicaid recipients. So she got a carve-out for Alaska. But she voted to impose all those same things on the rest of the country. So they're basically zeroing out Medicaid over a number of years. The cuts are timed...
Not immediately, though.
The
right?
cuts are
so
timed
it's not
to
like
start.
This year.
The cuts are timed to start right after the midterms. So if the Democrats win the midterms, all the bad things will happen immediately after they do that. So this is set up to make the Democrats look like the bad guys, even although this is an absolutely Republican bill. So they're so sneaky about these things. But they're trying to zero out Medicaid. I think they were cutting... The House bill was going to cut $880 billion from Medicaid. I think the Senate went even further, and the Senate's version is what passed in the end. So the cuts were even worse. And a lot of the holdouts, the Republican holdouts, were not holding out because they thought the bill went too far. They thought it didn't go far enough. They wanted more cuts to medical care, more cuts to SNAP benefits. It's just, they want to crush ordinary people.
There's only a couple of the senators. Wait, is it Rand Paul and Adam Schiff? Wait, are they both in the House? I can't remember.
Adam Schiff's a senator now. Rand Paul...
He's in the House still, right?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, so... Yeah, this bill is going to be horrific. It's also massive cuts to Medicare. So the disabled, the young, the pregnant women, poor people and old people are all going to find they get cut off their health care. This is going to force the closure of masses of rural hospitals that depend on Medicare and Medicaid for everything that they run. So those hospitals are already starting to close. They're also going to be closing nursing homes everywhere because those depend on Medicare. And so a whole bunch of people are going to find that their elderly parents are turning up on their doorstep because it's that or homelessness. And who has room? I mean, not everybody has space for extra people. And if you're working, how do you even manage that? All of a sudden, you might have parents with dementia, and that requires round-the-clock care. How are you supposed to work and support your family if you're trying to deal with perhaps 2 sets of elderly parents with dementia in a house that's far too small? Things like that. The things this is going to impose on people are horrific. And there are massive cuts to SNAP benefits, to food stamps. There are some people who abuse food stamps, but the vast majority of people are on food stamps because they don't have any other way to feed their family.
Right.
And it's going to be cut to the bone. And there are going to be work requirements for it. Well, unemployment is way higher than they say it is. They've fiddled the numbers for years and years and years to make unemployment look low. Unemployment is not low. Unemployment is through the roof. And it's going to get worse and worse and worse from here.
But there are going to be jobs with, what is the people that go, the ICE, because they've increased the budget for ICE, right?
Yeah, it's more than the Marines now. The budget for ICE is more than the next top 10 international militaries. The ICE has a bigger budget than the Russian military.
So
This is insane.
So what is the U.S. going to see, like, as far as ICE is concerned?
Raging fascism. They're going to start rounding up dissidents. So another thing I posted this morning was about another bill that's passed that's looking at just basically taking people off the streets. It looks like they're trying to help mentally ill homeless people. It's supposed to address the homeless problem. But if you look at the actual text of what they're doing, it gives them the right...
Is this a bill or a executive order?
I think it's an executive order, actually. Yeah, it's an executive order. But, Trump has signed it, so this is what's going to happen. Basically, they can pick up homeless people and just put them in a concentration camp. But he won't stop with homeless people.
Like the concentration camp in Florida, that one?
Oh, yes. I call it alligator Auschwitz rather than alligator Alcatraz. And the abuses of human rights that go on there are just epic. And they're not just sending criminals there. They're picking up gardeners and construction workers and all sorts of people. Anyone who looks Latino is now being racially profiled. I don't know if you noticed, but Laura Loomer, who's one of Trump's, well, she's probably Trump's side piece, quite frankly, but she's certainly a hanger-on in the MAGA world. She posted about, let's feed 65 million people to the alligators. That's not the population of illegal immigrants. That's the entire Latino population of the United States, is 65 million people. So these are the people, they just want to get rid of all of them. If you are, and Tom Homan has said this, he's gone on television saying, I have the right to see you look like an illegal immigrant, so I can detain you.
Who said this?
Tom Homan, the head of ICE. So if you're just driving around and you happen to look Latino, or somebody hears you speaking Spanish in McDonald's, you can be detained by ICE, and you have to show your papers. But there's no due process. And they've been known to be shown a real ID, which you're supposed to have for driver's license, and they just say, I think that's fake, and they take them anyway. And because there's no due process, how are you supposed to prove whether you're a citizen or not if you don't even get a hearing? You'll be on the plane to El Salvador before you can even prove you were a U.S. citizen. This is why due process matters so much. But they've got rid of it. They've said, we don't need hearings. Nobody was asking for full trial, but a hearing in front of an immigration judge where you can say, yes, I am actually a citizen, here's my passport. If you don't get a chance to do that, how are you supposed to prove that you shouldn't be put on a plane and sent to God only knows where? They're sending people to third countries where they've never even lived. So there are a bunch of people they've sent to El Salvador, but they're sending Latinos to South Sudan and Libya, war zones, where they don't speak the language, they don't know anybody, they're just going to die almost immediately. This is an extermination regime. And that executive order doesn't just let them pick up homeless people, it lets them pick up anyone that is a danger to society. Dissidents, in other words. Let's disappear the dissidents. This is fascism. This is exactly what Pinochet did in Chile, for instance. This is horrendous. Like, if I was in the United States, I would be out of there as fast as I possibly could. I would be ditching my passport. It's difficult. I think it takes about 2 years to get rid of American citizenship, but I would absolutely be doing it.
Why would you get rid of American citizenship?
Because I would never want to set foot in the country ever again. Oh. And because they tax you wherever you live. Americans who live here have to pay taxes in the U.S., and they can be arrested if they aren't up to date with all their taxes. The minute they go back to visit family, they can be arrested. And this is before Trump came around. This has been the case for quite a long time. And other countries will probably try and do this too, global taxation. But it means you're double taxed, and they can harass you. A friend of mine, I used to be part of a group called the Living Economies Educational Trust. I was on their board. One of the other board members was American, and he was the chairman. He had to take his name off the bank account because, being American, the bank account for this charity was subject to American tax law. And it's a New Zealand charity, just because the chairman happened to be American. But he's lived here for years. So this kind of thing, I just would not put up with that at all. The thought that Big Brother would be watching me even from the other side of the world.
I would think that the Americans that have moved overseas would just refuse to return and refuse to pay these taxes.
Yeah, I'm sure some of them do. But it does mean you can never visit your family again if you make that decision. And also, if you do get rid of your American citizenship and then you travel back to visit your family on somebody else's passport, you will be taken aside for a whole lot of extra questioning, because now you're a traitor. So this is not a good situation. The political culture in America today is utterly toxic. And it was even before Trump. Trump has made it 1,000 times worse. But even under Biden was Genocide Joe. And they did nothing for ordinary people. The Democratic Party abandoned the working class a very long time ago. The Democratic Party is the party of the managerial class, the professionals. And the Republicans are the party of the billionaires. But the Republicans know how to lie to working people to say, oh yes, we definitely support you. Nobody cares about the working class. Nobody. They're completely unrepresented politically.
So it's time for Elon Musk's new party then.
Well, I have zero respect for Elon Musk in any way whatsoever. He's just trying to get back at Trump. Both of them are man-children. They're both incredibly immature. They're about a level of middle schoolers.
Are you saying that you don't think he's like the most brilliant genius in the world, and he should be like on TV all the time?
He's a con man vaporware salesman and always has been. He overpromises and underdelivers.
But he's like a billionaire. How is it possible? Billionaires have to be geniuses in order to become billionaires.
The vast majority of his money comes from government contracts. He's a defense contractor. He's absolutely part of the deep state. And the reason he's pissed with Trump is that he didn't get all the things that he was looking for. He wanted to be able to sit in on high-level briefings about China because he does a lot of business in China. He has no right to be there. He wanted to determine American foreign policy with regard to China. And he wanted to do all sorts of other things. He wanted to nominate the head of NASA, and he was not elected to do any of this. He walked into government totally unelected, just fired people randomly, having no idea what they did, what their roles were, why any of it mattered. Just chucked people out, then had to hire a bunch of them back, and there's so much expertise that's been lost already. I mean, sure, there's fraud and waste in the government, and it should be removed, but you do that with a scalpel, not with a chainsaw. You don't go around high on ketamine wielding a fake chainsaw and have people take you seriously. I mean, he's a complete immature man-child. He's also a Nazi. He's a white supremacist. A whole lot of the people, the billionaires behind Trump, are South African white supremacists. So that's David Sachs, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, various others.
Peter Thiel is South African?
I think his family was German, but he was raised in South Africa. He has very strong South African connections anyway. So all of these people hate democracy. They're all white supremacists, and they're trying to recreate apartheid South Africa in the United States. I don't think it's going to work, but they're going to create a hell of a lot of havoc in the attempt. One of the things they really want at the moment, they're getting rid of all the farm workers. The farmers seem to think that the black people will come and do all the farm work. In other words, they want to take the country back 100 years. to indentured servitude, to the Reconstruction era. But they've forgotten that black people are now professionals. They have jobs. They live in cities. They do not live anywhere near farms, typically. There's no way they're going to force this entire population to go back and be farm workers, indentured servants, the way they once were. But the whole way the country is moving is undeniably fascist. It's almost cartoonishly fascist. And it's probably going to end up being significantly worse than World War II. Because now there are nuclear weapons, there's so much more weaponry, so many more ways to kill people, more ways to control people. Musk wants to put brain chips in everybody. You listen to these billionaires, and they're talking about transhumanism. So they're saying, humans will go extinct, but transhumans will survive. People with chips in their brains, or people who've uploaded their consciousness to a computer or something. These people are nuts.
That's not on your list of life goals before you die, to be uploaded?
Oh, no. One of their philosophies is extreme long-termism. Now, I need to explain discount rates. So if you are, say, a homeless person, and you don't know where your next meal is coming from, your discount rate is through the roof, because the discount rate is how much you care about the future compared to the present. If you don't know where your next meal is coming from, the future doesn't exist. Your next meal is all you care about. But if you've got more money than God, your discount rate is really low. Now you really start thinking about the future. The future they're thinking about is a Star Trek future where everyone, humanity, transhuman, whatever, trillions of transhuman entities spread out and rule a galaxy. They seriously believe this. And they're saying...
Where do they imagine the energy is going to come?
I don't think they have a clue, because it can't happen.
Even with Musk's starship to Mars or something,
it's never going to happen.
The amount of energy it would take to colonize Mars is massive.
You couldn't do it.
No.
You couldn't. If you threw every joule of energy on the entire planet at the project, you couldn't do it. Like, there's simply no way. You would just die almost immediately. But the thing is, what they do, when you have this extreme long-termism view, they say, well, if the people who exist today use up all the resources, we won't have our Star Trek future. And we have to count all these trillions of people in the future.
It sounds like you're talking about the tech bros.
Yes, exactly. This is what the tech bro billionaires believe.
They truly believe that Star Trek is possible.
They believe it. And they also believe they're going to find a way to live forever. So they have to get rid of the rest of us. There's only 8 billion of us. I mean, there could be trillions of transhumans in the future, and we can't have the 8 billion real people today use up all the resources and then preclude that glorious future. This is what they seriously believe. It's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. But when you've reached that kind of pinnacle, you don't get a reality check from anybody anymore. You end up thinking that you know everything because you're rich, so of course you must be really smart. And so they think what they believe must be true simply because they think it. And this is not
confirmation bias of some sort, kind of.
You can look up extreme long-termism. I think Nick Bostrom, I forget, William McCaskill was the other person who was writing about this. You can look him up on Wikipedia. And
so you're talking about people that live past 100 and past 120.
They think Jared Kushner has been on television saying, we will either be the last generation to die or the first generation to live forever. They seriously think they can do this. This is insane. These people are lunatics. And they're trying to get rid of the people today because we're using up resources, because they want this Star Trek future. So they want to grossly reduce the population, control all the resources themselves, create this transhuman reality, and then lead to a Star Trek future. This is insane.
If they want to reduce the population, then why is Musk supposedly having child after child?
Well, they want their people to be the future. They just don't want the rest of us to get a look in. So they would say, well, the carrying capacity of the world is perhaps 500 million to 1 billion people, which is actually true. But their solution for that is, let's get rid of 7 billion people. Whereas I would say, nature was already taking care of this. If you look at the birth rates around the world, we're looking at absolute population collapse over not that many generations.
This is more a kind of societal choice, though. It's not like...
Yeah, it is.
It's not like ovaries aren't working anymore.
Well, to some extent it is, because that is another thing that the vaccines do. They actually concentrate in the ovaries. They cause massive infertility. They cause 80% miscarriage in the first trimester. They cause miscarriage later on. They cause stillbirths. They cause birth defects. So the rest of us are being impacted in our ability to reproduce, as well as our ability to continue to exist. But they are just breeding like rabbits if they can possibly get away with it, because they want their people to be the future. So this is completely nuts, but you can look all of it up. They mostly don't even hide it. They just think that people either aren't paying attention, which is probably true, or they wouldn't understand it even if they were, which is also probably true. So they just think they can just come out and say, oh yes, we're going to do this, and get away with it.
So it sounds like there are groups of billionaires who don't necessarily agree with one another, because you've got Trump, for example.
Yes, there are.
And you've got Elon Musk, for example, and then like perhaps Peter Thiel is in a different group, and the billionaires in the Middle East in maybe another group, or is there like...
The American billionaires are mostly on one side, not Trump, because he doesn't really count. Trump is a fly-by-night. He's only a billionaire because he discovered crypto corruption, because people led him into it by the hand. He didn't understand any of this, but he's been told, you can get fabulously wealthy if you do all these things that we, the billionaires, tell you to do. So he's fine with that. He gets kudos, he gets pats on the back, he gets to play golf all the time and just sign the occasional executive order and then boss people around and wreck the trading like regime around the entire world. And he gets to be fabulously wealthy in the process. So what's not to like if you're Trump and all you care about is yourself? Because that is all he cares about. He's a malignant narcissist. People who are malignant narcissists have no capacity for empathy. They literally do not care about any other person on the face of the earth. Everything Trump does is self-serving. So even his kids don't get a look in. They only care about themselves. And a lot of people who are dictators and tyrants are malignant narcissists. So it's like what Machiavelli would have said. So malignant narcissists are sadists, psychopaths, Machiavellian manipulators. It's called the Dark Triad if you look it up in the DSM. But they're people who have this collection of traits that make them uniquely dangerous and absolutely guaranteed to abuse power. But the moment Trump is basically, he's on his way out. He has dementia. It's pretty obvious. He's very cognitively impaired. So he's just being a frontman for the billionaires, for the tech bro billionaires who are funding him, who put him in office in the first place and are now telling him what to do. He didn't come up with Project 2025. That came from Leonard Leo and the Heritage Foundation, the Federalist Society, and people like that. And it's all being sanctified by the Supreme Court because he also put the people on the Supreme Court. In Trump's first term, he just outsourced the choices of Supreme Court to the Federalist Society. So the people who were put in there were not necessarily Trumpists, but they were unitary executive people. It's just Trump is currently the executive, but what they want is to create a monarchy, basically. And so Trump will be shuffled off this mortal coil in favor of J.D. Vance, and then you'll end up with basically a CEO. They want to to turn the country into a giant Silicon Valley startup and run it with a CEO issuing orders and no human rights. I mean, human rights are gone, habeas corpus is gone, due process is gone. It's whatever the CEO decides on a whim on any given day.
So for people who are considering relocating, if it looks like Trump is going to resign or die or whatever, then that would be kind of a green light to move.
Oh, yes. I absolutely would. And in fact, I wouldn't just leave America. I would leave Canada too. And I worry about my family in Canada.
Why do you worry about Canada?
Because Trump is trying to take it over. And
he doesn't seem to be doing anything.
What he's doing is funding separatists in Alberta to try and break up the country into small parts. This is what they do. They break up countries so then they can take it out one piece at a time. So he's funding the Alberta separatist movement. Because Alberta is the closest thing to MAGA in Canada. They're the sort of ranchers and cowboys and oil drillers and people like that. So he's trying to break the country apart. There are actually separatist movements in various parts of Canada. There's a separatist movement in Newfoundland, for instance, quite a strong one. My brother used to live there, and they had their own flag and things. So it actually wouldn't be all that difficult to break up Canada, and he's determined to do it, and then just take the pieces one by one.
Trump is? Why does he even really care?
Well, he wants the American empire to be bigger and more powerful.
Just because?
Because he will have more kudos. if he's ruling over a bigger piece of territory...
Kudos, what are we saying here?
Well, pats on the back.
Oh, yes.
Sort of, oh, bow, scrape, this sort of thing. You know, the great leader of all this territory. He's actually talked about how the American empire needs to be bigger than it currently is. And he's talked about Israel needing to be much, much bigger. He looked at it on a map and said, oh, that's so small, it should be much bigger. And if you look at the Israeli flag, the lines on the Israeli flag are the Nile and the Euphrates. And they are laying claim to everything in between those two. It will never happen. But if you look at the uniforms IDF soldiers wear, that patch of land is on their uniform, Greater Israel. So they want all of Lebanon, all of Jordan, all of Syria, a big chunk of Iraq, a big chunk of Egypt, a big chunk of Saudi Arabia. Like, this is delusional. Just delusional on steroids. 9 million people, and a bunch of them are already leaving. And a bunch more have PTSD from what they've been forced to do. And because they have a reserve army, their economy is collapsing because they've taken people out of their jobs to put them into the army. And so there's no future for the country of Israel at the moment. It's just destroying itself. It's committing suicide. So they don't even need to be taken out by anyone else. They will simply implode at some point. Far too many people will leave. There's going to be nothing left of the economy. Iran took out basically their oil refineries, their ports, the IDF headquarters, the Mossad headquarters, the Weizmann Institute, which was their military technology science institute. The damage that Iran did to Israel was absolutely massive.
But Israel has all these Iron Dome rockets. They can protect themselves forever.
And the Iron Dome does absolutely nothing.
But I watched videos, and it showed the missiles coming right up, and you could see there's some interceptions. Not all of them were intercepted, but there were many.
Yeah, so they were intercepting the drones, which were... Drones fly quite slowly. They're fairly easy to take down. But if they hit, they would blow up. So they wanted to take them down. But those were sent to saturate the air defense so that then the missiles could come in. So Iran has not used its most modern missiles. It used
drones. Are you talking about like quadcopters, or are you talking about like
Shahid drones?
Little airplane drones.
Shahid drones. So they're bigger much bigger than quadcopters.
It looks like an airplane kind of.
They're like the ones Russia uses in Ukraine, because the original design was the Shahid from Iran, and Russia imported a bunch of those. And they call them Geran, which is geranium in Russian. So the Geran drones being used in Ukraine are the same as the Shahids, and that's what was being sent over. But they don't fly quickly. You can take them down, but then you've used up all your air defense missiles. And the missiles...
They can just get more from the U.S., though, because the U.S. keeps on supporting...
And the U.S. produces 550 of these a year, and that would be used up in, like, less than a month of what Israel is trying to do.
You're saying the replenishment rate is quite low.
Yes. And so America doesn't have the industrial surge capacity to produce the weaponry that it's going to need, even for one war. And it's proposing a triple front war. It wants to go to war in Russia and the Middle East and China as well. This is just ridiculous. The U.S. Army is not what it once was. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, it really was the most powerful military on the face of the earth. It absolutely is not that today. American industry does not produce weapons to win wars. They produce weapons to make money. So they design them overcomplicated with tons and bells and whistles. And they'll have maintenance contracts. You have to go back to, say, Lockheed Martin or Raytheon or something to get these things maintained. And those contracts are really expensive. This is an absolute license to print money for the military-industrial complex. But these things, like, some of them can't fly in fog. Like, they don't have the capacity that they need to actually win a war on the battlefield. The Russians build simple weapons, much simpler, but they build them to win wars, and they build them to defend the country. The U.S. could not defend itself against an enemy at this point. Their stocks of everything are so low.
In a conventional conflict, you mean?
Yeah, their stocks of everything are so low. They've sent so much to Ukraine and Israel that they don't have enough to even defend the homeland if they were ever attacked. The assumption is they never will be, because they got fish on either side and then Canada and Mexico. So America tends to think it's completely immune from everything. Well, it's not, because there are a whole lot of hypersonic missiles in the world that could definitely reach the United States. The U.S. doesn't have hypersonic missiles, and it has no means to shoot down hypersonic missiles. You can't, because they're maneuverable. So they come across at hypersonic speeds, but then they're maneuverable, and they will come down on your head at Mach 20. You can't intercept these. It's physically impossible. And they can go round and round and round the world until the person who fired it decided, oh, make it go down now. Boom. So you don't even necessarily know where it's come from. The threats America faces today are insane. Russian nuclear subs could create a tsunami that would wipe out the entire East Coast. America does not have these capabilities. It has other capabilities. It has a whole lot of nuclear weapons. It could definitely take out the world with its nuclear arsenal. But the world could take it out as well. Fairly easily. Even North Korea could bomb the United States with nuclear weapons. North Korea is tiny and impoverished, but they could damage the United States if they really wanted to.
I hear North Korea has an amazing new water park.
Well, North Korea now has an alliance with Russia. So it's not just a military alliance. Russia is now providing food and investment in North Korea. So North Korea has been an extremely impoverished state for a long time. It probably won't be in the future. So it remains to be seen where that's going. So far, the Kim dynasty is still standing strong. Who knows how long that will last?
So does that mean that North Korea is kind of part of BRICS by extension?
Oh, yes. Absolutely. Yeah, because it's part of the same thing. The BRICS countries are their own. So you've got three parts. You've got the American oligarchs. You've got the WEF contingent, all run by the Bank for International Settlements and the World Economic Forum. That's a Rothschild thing. That's based in Europe, in Geneva. And then you've got the BRICS countries. And the BRICS countries don't necessarily have a whole lot in common. It's hard to see how they're really going to create a cohesive unit. At least not all of them. So Brazil is a long way off. India's sort of fence-sitting. India's actually supporting Israel at the moment, which most of the BRICS countries are not. But I think India's doing that not because they particularly love Jewish people, but because they really hate Muslims. Because the Indian government is Hindu extremist. So they are taking on the Muslims in their own country, and they don't like the Muslims in the Middle East either. So I think that's where that's coming from. So India is not really much of a member of BRICS. But it's the most populous country in the world now, so they can't be discounted. They're just trying to sit on the fence, and they don't really know where they belong yet. Hopefully they'll figure that out at some point. But the main alliance is between Russia, China, and Iran. That's the axis. And so America is attacking the weakest link, which is Iran. They've been sanctioning Iran for half of forever, so Iran has really struggled with that. When they sanctioned Russia, Russia just said, oh, well, we'll just become self-sufficient, and they did. So there's no way they can take Russia down now. It's cut off from SWIFT, the financial contagion won't reach them, they're completely self-sufficient in resources, and they can trade with China and things as well for additional industrial capacity. So yeah, they're absolutely fine. Iran is not as self-sufficient as that. And Iran doesn't want nuclear weapons. There's a religious fatwa against the production of nuclear weapons, but they have an extraordinary arsenal of conventional missiles. So far more modern things than they've used so far. They could literally wipe Israel off the face of the earth. They could wipe several places off the face of the earth if they wanted to, they don't want to.
They sent a bunch of missiles a couple weeks ago, like before the ceasefire, over to Qatar or something, Abu Dhabi, I can't remember.
Yeah, they did. So this was performative. So the US basically told Iran, we're going to bomb these sites. And so Iran moved all the stuff out. And then Iran said, well, we have to bomb you back. We're going to bomb Qatar, so but get all your people out. We don't want to hurt anybody. We just want it. We have to retaliate. You understand? It's political. So the whole thing was performative. Nobody really did a lot of damage to either side. But the point of this, and if it had worked, it would have been a half-decent strategy. So Trump bombed these things, and he says, oh, we've obliterated the nuclear threat. There's nothing to worry about anymore. If that had been believable, it would have removed the rationale for war with Iran by Israel. So Israel wants to take out Iran's nuclear capacity. That was their rationale for attacking Iran in the first place. They actually wanted regime change, but the excuse was we have to take out the nuclear capacity. So if Trump could credibly say, oh, we took out the nuclear capacity, now you have no reason to go to war. If he'd done that credibly, it might even have worked. But he didn't do it credibly, because he never does. Everybody knows he's a pathological liar. And his claims were so over the top, as they always are, that everyone just said, oh, yeah, right. And so everybody knows the nuclear threat is still there. And in fact, Iran now has a massive incentive to go ahead and produce a nuclear weapon. They still might not do it because the fatwa stands at the moment. It would take the Ayatollah to change his mind. And not just him personally. I think they have to actually have a sort of council of people. So they have to have a broad agreement that this is something that should happen now. And I'm not convinced that's going to happen. So they may not develop a weapon, but they have every incentive to do so, because that's the only way the empire will leave you alone. You have to be nuclear armed if you want the empire not to come and invade you, break up your country, and steal all your resources. So they have every incentive. And all sorts of other countries now do too. I would be willing to bet that Saudi Arabia is going to get a nuclear weapon fairly soon. The US will probably provide them the technology. Saudi Arabia is another country that's kind of fence-sitting. It really should be part of BRICS, but it's been part of it's been a vassal state of America for so long that it would take a big deal to try and get them to shift to the other side. And I think they realize that they would probably be attacked if they tried to do any such thing. And MBS really likes his money, so he doesn't want to do anything that's going to get them attacked.
Now, you were saying that you think things are going to get messy in the U.S. and Canada. Mm-hmm. What about the other English-speaking countries of the world?
Well, I'm worried about all Western countries because we're all part of the empire. So we're basically all vassal states of the United States. We're not independent. They could crush every economy in Europe and Australasia overnight through the SWIFT system. They could just destroy the economy, cut off all credit, and take everything down.
Let's refresh everybody on the SWIFT system.
So it's a money transfer system. America controls the money transfer system, and it has weaponized it against the rest of the world. So this is how you keep vassals in line, by saying, well, if you do that, we'll just wreck your economy, so you really better not do that. So you have
Are you
all these
talking about
countries,
through like the Federal Reserve, or who is in control of the SWIFT system, if anyone?
Well, it's presumably under the Fed. So I don't know exactly the mechanisms for who is pushing what buttons with the SWIFT system, but it is under American control. And so they've weaponized the SWIFT system and the dollar against the rest of the world. So what this is when you lose the capacity to keep expanding and sucking resources in from more and more and more far-flung places, when you lose that capacity, but the people at the top in the center, the economic center, still want to stay at the top. They don't want to lose anything. They are going to force the losses on everybody else. So what America is currently doing is sucking all its vassal states dry. It's stealing their resources. It's forcing them to buy weaponry from the US. So they're saying to the Europeans at the moment, you must spend 5% of your whole GDP, not your budget, your whole GDP must be spent on weaponry. And send all your weapons to Ukraine, and then you must buy new weapons from us. We have to be the ones to supply all the weapons. So first you bought all these other weapons, you have to give those away, then you have to spend billions and billions of dollars to buy more weapons from us. And by the way, F-35s have a kill switch. So if you misbehave, we'll shut your weapons off. So you can't turn them against us, because we can just turn them all off. And this is just awful. The level of control they have over the vassal states is massive. And I mean, this part of the world, we're vassal states as well. We're further away. So if they start to really lose control, they'd probably lose control of us first. But they have in mind to use us to fight China.
Us
so,
as in?
Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines. So they're using Ukraine as a proxy against Russia. And they want to use Taiwan as a proxy against China. They want to use us as proxies against China. So the idea is get everyone else to do the dirty work. Let other people die. So Lindsey Graham is saying, oh, that's the best investment we ever made. We're just sending money over and killing tons of Russians, and none of us are dying. Yeah, but you're fighting to the last Ukrainian. The Ukrainians have lost about 1.75 million people on the battlefield at the moment. The Russians have lost about 150,000. The ratio is massive. It's like 10 to 1 casualties on the Ukrainian side. And it's not just the deaths, it's the injuries as well. There are always vastly more injuries than there are deaths. Ukraine has more amputees than anywhere else on the face of the earth. There's a huge prosthetic industry that's being developed to deal with all these people who were just destroyed physically. Half the country has left. They had 45 million people before the war. I think they're down to about 22 million now. Anyone who can leave is leaving. A lot of women and children left. Now they're talking about conscripting people down to the age of 18. Previously, I think it was 26. They were 26 and up, they were conscripting. And when I say conscripting, I mean they press ganged these people. They just go around in unmarked vans and grab people off the street, throw them in a van. 2 weeks later, you're at the front with no training whatsoever. You might get a rifle if you're lucky, but otherwise you just sit in a trench until a Russian missile finds you. So people are just being slaughtered, absolutely slaughtered on the battlefield. And most of them, they have no idea what they're even doing. And now they're talking about sending teenagers, and maybe women. Hitler did the same thing at the end, by the way. He was sending boys from the Hitler Youth to be in the German army. And so Ukraine is just going to be completely decimated as a country. It's probably going to lose its whole Black Sea coast. It will be a rump state. Russia will take everything. I would think they'd take everything east of the Dnieper and the entire Black Sea coast. So at the moment, they have Crimea, which is 99% Russian anyway, and was always part of Russia. It was only put into Ukraine as an administrative thing by Stalin years ago, but it was always completely Russian. And now they have Lugansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. They've all voted to join the Russian Federation. So as far as Russia is concerned, those places are now Russia. And Russia will take, at the very minimum, all of those territories. They haven't got quite all of it yet. They've got all of Lugansk, but they haven't got all of the other three, so they're working on that. But they basically said, well, you can sign a peace deal now, or next it's going to be 8 oblasts you're going to be giving us. So it'll be everything east of the Dnieper, the whole Black Sea coast, Odessa as well. And then you'll get a rump Ukrainian state, which will be completely unviable, which will probably be partitioned between Hungary and Romania, the bordering countries, and Poland. Because actually quite a lot of Ukraine was originally Poland anyway. Poland shifted bodily to the west after the Second World War. So things have moved around quite a lot. Boundaries and things. So Lviv, as in Ukraine at the moment, was once Lvov in Poland. So they're going to just partition it, I think. But there will be nothing viable as a state. All the industry, the mineral wealth, the best farmland is all in the areas that are controlled by Russia. And Russia would then also control all the oil and gas deposits in the Black Sea.
What is this when the Ukrainian guy came to the U.S.? Zelensky, and he was in the live meeting with Trump, and then there appeared...
Trump abused him, yes.
Yes.
I think they're as bad as each other, quite frankly.
That there's what?
They're as bad as each other.
Oh.
So it was a horrible spectacle, totally unedifying, but there were no good guys in that room. So Zelensky is just a complete kleptocrat. He's absolutely corrupt. He was a puppet. So he was originally installed by Igor Kolomoisky, who's a Ukrainian oligarch. So what Kolomoisky did is he set up this television program called Servant of the People, where Zelensky played the president of Ukraine. People got used to the idea because they were watching the television show. Then he actually got elected, but then he was immediately co-opted by NATO as a puppet of them instead of Kolomoisky, and so now he's a complete NATO puppet, and he's just stolen billions of dollars. His whole circle is unbelievably corrupt. At least half the money and the weaponry that goes to Ukraine is sold on the black market all over the world. So javelins in the hands of Mexican cartels and things like that. And probably all over Africa as well, militias and things. So what's going on in Ukraine is absolutely horrendous. And that government, they are basically Nazis. So their national hero is Stepan Bandera. Stepan Bandera ran one of the most brutal segments of the Waffen-SS. He was an absolute ally of Hitler. He slaughtered thousands of Poles and Jews in the Second World War. He was one of the Nazi of all Nazis type people. He's the national hero in Ukraine today. So the person that they're about to put in, they're going to get rid of Zelensky fairly soon. They're going to put in Zaluzhny, who's currently ambassador to the UK. He's an absolute Banderite. He's a full-blown Nazi, but they're going to put him in. He's a general. He was originally in charge of the military before he got booted out to the United Kingdom because he was too much of a political threat to Zelensky. But they're going to put him back in because they think the military will respect him more than they respect Zelensky. So they might fight harder, even although they have very few weapons and no training and they don't have a clue. I mean, the people who are there are doing their best. Ukrainians are fierce fighters, and they do want to defend their homeland. They've been brainwashed into thinking that Russia is trying to take everything and destroy them, and it's really not. If you look at how this war started, what started originally in 2014, when the US overthrew the elected government in Ukraine and installed a bunch of Nazi puppets, and then they were bombing Donetsk and Lugansk, particularly Donetsk. So before the war started in 2022, from 2014 to 2022, the Ukrainian army had killed 15,000 civilians by randomly shelling Donetsk. Not military targets, just randomly shelling the place. And artillery strikes and all sorts. Killed 15,000 people. The Ukrainian army was on its way to march on Donetsk to wipe it out in 2022. That's why Russia came in. Because they were saying, no, you're not going to do this. When they came in with a force of 120,000 people. This is not an invasion force. There is no way you take over a country of 45 million people, as it was then, with a force of 120,000.
You're talking about the Russians.
The Russians, yes. So the Russians didn't come in to invade the country. They came in to defend the borders of the Russian-speaking areas, and they marched on Kyiv to surround it, to say, right, you lot, sign a peace treaty right now. This is not on. You are not going to do this. We're not going to let you sign a peace treaty. They came up with a peace treaty in Istanbul. And they were about to sign it when Boris Johnson was sent over to Ukraine to say, don't sign it. You have to fight. You have to fight these people.
Boris Johnson.
Premier of the UK at the time. Mm-hmm. He's another malignant narcissist, an absolute pathological liar. He has no morals whatsoever. He's a horrible, horrible person.
He's not in office right now, though.
No, he's not. But he wants to come back. He's trying to come back. And considering how unpopular Keir Starmer is, this might actually happen.
Was he the Brexit one? I can't remember.
He was all for Brexit. Yeah, he's a truly horrible individual. So he told them, no, you can't sign this peace treaty. So the peace treaty was thrown out. There would have been no war if this peace treaty had gone through. And Russia didn't even want to take Lugansk and Donetsk at the time. Lugansk and Donetsk had been begging to be part of the Russian Federation ever since 2014. They were saying to Russia, please take us in, please protect us, they're killing us. But Russia said, no, what we need to do is we need to create a situation where you can have autonomy, but you still need to be part of Ukraine, because you are part of Ukraine. And so it wasn't until the war started that Russia basically eventually came in with more than 120,000 people. When the peace treaty went down, then they actually came in for real. But it took them a while because they weren't prepared for that. They hadn't mobilized anywhere near enough people for that because they weren't expecting to be fighting a war. But after the peace treaty fell, there was quite a lull for a while the Russians built up their army. So for a while, all the war was being fought by the Wagner group, primarily, and militias and things like that. So they're the people who took Bakhmut. And they just stormed the city. And so they were a sort of military group outside of the official Russian military. But they got too big for their boots, particularly Prigozhin and Dmitry, I can't remember his last name, the fellow whose code name was Wagner, who ran the whole thing. It was run by the two of them. Eventually, they got too big for their boots and marched on Moscow. 2 months later, their helicopter went down. Putin doesn't tolerate that sort of thing. And then Wagner was just incorporated into the Russian military. So the Russian military went in for real after the peace treaty fell, and after they had mobilized enough people. Russia is currently getting 50,000 volunteers per month to join their army, whereas Ukraine is having to press gang people, and they can't get anywhere near the number of people that they need. So their army is just being completely attrited. This is a war of attrition. It's not at the moment a war for territory. It's let's get rid of the army, and then when the army's gone, we'll take whatever territory we want.
Is there not the possibility that any of the Europeans will go join the fray?
They're saying they will. They're talking about the coalition of the willing. But the coalition...
Again? Like in Middle East?
Yeah, the coalition of the willing is apparently the UK, France, and Germany. Various other countries have already said, no, we're out. We're not doing this. Now, the entire British Army would fit in Wembley Stadium with about 30,000 seats left over. They have hardly anything that they could actually mobilize. The German army apparently could defend about 8 kilometers of their border for about half an hour. Like, they can't even get their stuff out of barracks. They are so unprepared. Europe is completely demilitarized. Most of the weaponry they did have, which was old, from like the 60s to the 80s, has all been sent to Ukraine. They have basically nothing left. They don't have very many men at arms. The standards for military enrollment are much lower than they used to be. So Britain has groups like the SAS, the Special Air Service. So they're like commandos. They'll go in and do terrorist operations and things like that, but they don't have an army per se, not in the way they once did. So they're completely incapable of doing what they say they're going to do. They want to put 250,000 people, NATO soldiers, in Ukraine. They can't find 250,000 NATO soldiers. There's physically no way that this can happen. And if they go there, they'll be going as a tripwire. They will simply be killed. And this will be, it's kind of another provocation to Russia. It's like, so what are you going to do now? We send our guys in there. What are you going to do? And bomb them. Oh, Russia bombed our guys. Oh no, we must go and attack Russia because they're so horrible. They do these things all the time. It's just another provocation.
Well, there are lots of people in the world. I mean, apparently there are many immigrants, both in North America and in Europe. Maybe the immigrants would like to volunteer.
I doubt that very much. But I think one of the things they want to do with immigrants, apart from completely disrupting any sense of national identity, they want to get these people into roles like law enforcement and the military. These people will have no shared values, no shared loyalty with the country that they'll be basically mercenaries. So you get a military that will have no compunction on turning on its own people, for instance. That's what the immigrants would be for. I don't think the immigrants are necessarily going to go to Ukraine. I doubt very much that they would sign up for any such thing. But they'd probably be pretty happy to boss around the people in the West who've probably lorded it over them for a very long time. So Europeans have kind of bossed the rest of the world around for about 500 years. And we were the colonizers. We were the ones that thought we were better than everybody else. And we're about to find out that the shoe is on the other foot now. And we're the ones who are going to get colonized. So I actually think the whole West is at risk of collapse. We're all absolutely past the point of no return in terms of debt. And we're all under the thumb of the United States. So
Maybe it would just be a complete global jubilee. And then there's no debt. There'd be no debt.
The world has moved into a war cycle. And in war cycles, you typically lose about 1/3 of the population. And this is global. So this will kill billions of people over time. Now, did you see the Deagle forecast from some years ago?
No.
For instance? So Deagle works with the intelligence agencies.
This is a person or an organization?
It's an organization. So they work with the intelligence agencies. These are serious people. In 2017 was the last time they put out a published forecast for population, and the forecast was for the population in 2025. Now, they did not factor in pandemics or war. Their forecast for the population for the United States in 2025 was 80 million people. So,
which is much, much lower than now.
Yes,
because it's around 300
exactly.
million.
Exactly. So they weren't saying everyone was necessarily going to die. They were talking about massive emigration and things like that. But I assume that they were thinking that the financial crash would come sooner than it has, and that people would simply starve or have civil war or whatever it was. They assumed it was going to happen sooner than it has. But the assumptions they made were not wrong. They were just premature. And in fact, there are bigger things. There was the pandemic. There was the bioweapons. There's war. So there are things they weren't even factoring in. But basically every Western country was looking at population decline. The worst were going to be the US, the UK, and Germany. But all Western countries were going to see a population decline. I think we were supposed to decline by about 1/3, or something like that. Some countries were actually supposed to grow, but not Western countries. So basically, I think there's a takedown of the whole West. It's very difficult to know where one would really relocate to. I don't think there's anywhere on the face of the earth you could say would be safe.
You've got a backyard here.
Well, I'm quite happy with where we are.
Maybe we'll come and visit.
Everything's relative. So there are degrees of safety. Nothing will be totally safe. I don't think there's really any such thing. Total safety was always kind of an illusion. And there was always, you could meet a bus on the road any given day if your name was up. So there's no such thing as no risk. But risk is relative, and some places are way riskier than others. I reckon in America, they realized they weren't going to be able to disarm Americans, so they just decided to let them kill each other off instead. So they're doing everything they can to start a civil war. They're just doing divide and rule everywhere. You look at the two sides, they hate each other. They viscerally hate each other. These people, like in Sarajevo went from hosting the Winter Olympics to 8 years later, people shooting each other's children in the streets. Like, the veneer of civilization is really, really thin. And when you move into contraction, that's what ends up happening. You move into the psychology of contraction, where it's us versus them, where everybody's peering at each other over walls of suspicion, and it's really hard to get people to come together. You totally lose social cohesion. And of course that's been aided and abetted by this enormous influx of migrants. They were actually physically importing people. The NGOs set up base camps south of the Darien Gap, and they were actually importing people from all over the world and paying to funnel them into the United States. Tens of millions of people. So these are not like the people who used to come to the States. The people who used to come to the States, the caravans of people, were mostly from Central America or maybe South America.
So you're not referring to employees, right, who are currently employed in the U.S., like
No.
farm workers and hotel workers.
Yeah, they're the people who used to come. And they're actually really culturally compatible, really hard-working people.
Yes.
You know, the Trump people would say, oh, the Democrats were just bringing them in so they'd all vote Democrat. It's like, do you realize how religious and conservative these people are? They would never vote for the agenda that the Dems were pushing in the last election. You know, because a lot of this wokery was really pushing the zone way, way too far. You know, all this identity politics and everything where your identity, the color of your skin matters more than anything else. And Martin Luther King said he wanted to be judged on the content of your character, not the color of your skin. But the Dems have pushed the color of your skin is the only thing that matters. Or you have to be trans, or you have to be gay, or you have to be whatever, but your identity, your group identity, is the only thing that came to matter to them. And these religious conservatives would say, to hell with that. You'd never vote for that. They weren't being brought in for that reason. But the people who had been coming before, the hard-working people, some of them had been here for decades. They might be undocumented, but they were really hard-working people. They were absolutely part of the fabric of society in America. They were the people who did all the hard work. And now they're all being kicked out. So there was no problem with those kinds of migrants. But the migrants who've been coming in latterly, under the last administration, which imported literally tens of millions of people from all over the world, they're not culturally compatible. Most of them are young men of military age, so they're going to cause a whole lot of trouble because they're not going to be able to find jobs. They don't speak the language quite often. They don't have the skills they would need to be employed pretty much in any way. So you just create chaos, absolute chaos. And you send these people into neighborhoods where all kinds of things, schools get repurposed as migrant hotels. And what they were doing was giving these people a lot of money, putting them up in shelters, giving them all kinds of free health care, free this, free that. And this was partly to piss off the native population, which weren't getting anything. But the main reason they were doing that is they were putting money in the hands of people who would spend it immediately. It was a stimulus for the velocity of money, because the velocity of money had been tanking for a long time. It's not just when you move into deflation, it's not just that the money supply collapses, it's that the velocity of money collapses as well. So whatever money people still have, they hang on to it for dear life. So nothing is circulating in the economy, and you can't support economic activity. If you want to goose the velocity of money, you put money in the hands of people who have basically nothing, who will spend it immediately. And that way you can make it look like you're not on the verge of an economic depression. So that was the primary rationale. The secondary rationale was, let's dilute the national identity and piss everybody else off. And they absolutely succeeded in doing that. But the US is on the verge of civil war. So's the UK, by the way. So if you look up David Betts, he's a professor of these sorts of things. He's living in the UK at the moment, but he's American. And he's done quite a few interviews recently about the UK being absolutely on the verge of civil war. And the same criteria apply in the US. This is population reduction. If you want to reduce the population, what you do is you unleash all four horsemen of the apocalypse at the same time. Disease and famine and death and war. You inflict all of that pretty much at once. The war on farming is going to create famine. So they're just making life difficult for farmers in every way they possibly can. Not just there, they're absolutely doing it here too. For instance, here, if you have a farm and you have, say, a stand of native bush on your farm, they'll come along and say, oh, that's native bush. You're not allowed to touch that. You're not ever allowed to use it. You can't do anything with it. But you still own it, so you still have to pay taxes on it. So it's sucking wealth out of farmers. They're imposing water payments on farmers. They're imposing nitrogen limits that are absolutely impossible to meet if you have livestock on your land. And because they want to get rid of all the meat, they want to get rid of livestock. So they want people to be malnourished and impoverished. They want food to come from factories where they'll make stuff out of mealworms and crickets and things like that. So if you end up in a 15-minute city, that's what you're getting. You're getting bug soup and mealworm milk and things like that. They literally are making milk out of ground up mealworms. It's the most disgusting thing. But this is what they want people to be eating. So billionaires are buying up the farmland. And foreign places, China and Saudi Arabia bought up a whole lot of farmland in the US as well. But they're also making it incredibly difficult for family farmers, imposing the same burdens on them that you'd impose on really large corporate kind of things. But of course they can't meet the regulatory burden. They can't afford that level of regulatory burden. So it's putting them out of business, and the land is all going into the hands of corporates. And the corporates are going to be feeding the rich people, not the ordinary people. So famine is absolutely coming. And I can only imagine what the country is going to look like in a few years' time. And shit is going to hit the fan in a spectacular way. Yeah, I really worry about the UK enormously as well. The UK is I think it's a little bit smaller than New Zealand, but they have 65 million people. And there is no way under the sun that they are going to be able to feed all those people. And there's just going to be horrendous violence there. It is so profoundly sad, but this is part of the psychology of contraction. When you go from expansion, which is all about the good side of human nature getting traction, into contraction, then the bad side of human nature gets all the traction. So it's envy and jealousy and suspicion and us versus them and all that sort of thing. And over time, us becomes ever more tightly defined, like these purity tests that they use. Oh, you don't agree with us 100% on absolutely everything? Out you go. The us becomes tightly defined, and them becomes ever more pejorative. So them, they're not really human over there. And this is just how you divide and rule. You break everything up into tiny little groups that are then extremely hostile to each other. So you get intra-group cohesion and intra-group cohesion and inter-group fighting, conflict. And considering how many weapons there are in the US right now, that's an oh my god scenario. So I would not want to be there. I really would not. I mean, I can't go there. They would arrest me on the spot. I'd be in a nice detention because I criticize the American government all the time. And anyone who comes into America who has criticized the American government, even mildly, even years ago, will be immediately deported. And if they say anything like half the things I've said about the American government, I'd be disappeared. It's difficult to be a fence sitter, in a sense, when you're in this kind of environment. So I fail everybody's purity tests because I'm not tribal. I absolutely refuse to be tribal. Sometimes one side is right. Sometimes the other side is right. Often they're both wrong, usually for different reasons. But I'm interested in truth, and I will follow truth wherever it leads. I spend my entire life soaking up input and data as to what's going on in the whole world in every way I possibly can. Everything to do with finance, everything to do with energy, disease mechanisms, geopolitics, psychology, herding behavior, agriculture, food system, how everything fits together with everything else. And I literally spend 16 hours a day doing exactly that at double speed. And I've been doing it for 40 years. You can learn a lot in 40 years when you really try. I have absolutely insatiable intellectual curiosity, but it means that sometimes I have to accept certain things are uncomfortable, but they're true. So sometimes the MAGA types have a point. Sometimes they don't. I don't like the other side either. So I just look at politicians, especially in large countries. I think once you move beyond human scale, people are corrupted, they have all kinds of other incentives besides doing what they were sent there to do, and you lose any sense of representation. So Dmitry Orlov calls this functional stupidity, where you end up with a group that operates at a scale where it's completely disconnected from everything outside of it. And the actions it takes are functional in the sense that they keep the system going, but they're stupid in the sense that they sow the seeds of its own destruction over the long term. So, and systems like that are completely incapable of learning from their own mistakes. They're on a trajectory, and they are going to continue on that trajectory till they hit a brick wall at 100 miles an hour, metaphorically speaking. And that's exactly what's coming. You really need to work at smaller scale than that. We need to work at much more human scale in order that people can learn. And they can say, oh, well, that didn't work, let's do something different. Rather than just say, well, that didn't work, we'll double down and do more of it. But that's what they do. They double down on absolutely everything all the time. And you've got this massive corruption at large scale now. Absolutely massive corruption. And all the people at the top are almost entirely self-serving. They say power, absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's not just that power corrupts, although it does. It's that power attracts the corrupt. People who want to boss other people around seek power. And then they get power and they boss other people around. So it's not rocket science, it's basic psychology. And you look at herding behavior and how that works, and mental contagions and things like that, and the way you can hypnotize populations. It's fascinating. It's called the Hegelian dialectic, threat, response. So you create an enormous threat, then you offer a solution. The threat is so huge that people will glom onto the solution as if nothing else existed. Just, nope, this solution, that's the only thing in the world that matters. And then anyone who doesn't go along with that is persona non grata. And then they do the exact thing, they get people to demand the exact thing that the powers that be wanted all along. So you just facilitate a control agenda. So in the case of these shots, it was, we have this big disease, we'll just whip up all this incredible fear. It had about the same death rate as the flu. And in fact, the average age of death from COVID was a year higher than the average age of death for the whole population. So the only people who were really at risk from COVID were the old and those with multiple comorbidities. And almost nobody else had very much to worry about at all. For the beginning, there was a little bit more to worry about because it was more virulent in its first stages, but it, as they often do, it attenuated over time to the point where Omicron is essentially a cold. But they frightened people so much. It was, let's see what we can get away with. Let's lock them all down. Let's force vaccinate them. Tell them they can't go to work, they can't shop, they can't do this unless they take this shot. And they got everyone to just focus on that. And if you were not prepared to do that, the things that came out in the paper, we must take their children away. We have to force them to pay everyone else's medical bills. We must jail them. We should kill them. Just because they said they didn't want to take a vaccine, you think it's okay to just abuse them in every possible way? When the shots did not prevent transmission, they did not reduce the severity of the condition because they had no therapeutic value at all. They weren't even tested to see if they would reduce transmission. Pfizer admitted this in public. So there was so much going on. The contracts for these things, by the way, they're all Defense Department contracts. The virus was developed originally at Ralph Barrick's lab in North Carolina, UNC North Carolina, at Chapel Hill. And then when Obama outlawed gain of function, they moved it to Wuhan. But it was still funded by Fauci. It was still funded by the American Department of Defense. And if you look at the contracts, these vaccines are described as countermeasures. They're not therapeutics, they're military countermeasures. It's in black and white in the contracts for all of this. So follow Sasha Latypova, for instance. She and Catherine Watt worked together. Sasha Latypova ran a pharmaceutical company. So she's an MBA. She's not a doctor or a scientist, but she was running a company. And so her job was to absolutely know inside out the rules for running a pharmaceutical company, all the good manufacturing practice and everything else. She was looking at the adverse events and things that were going on. And she was saying, there's no good manufacturing process here. What the hell is going on? And so she started doing a deep dive into it from her perspective. Catherine Watt, is a lawyer, did a deep dive on all the contract side of things, and they worked together, and they just blew the lid off the whole thing. But people don't pay attention. They're not seeing what's actually happening. If you look, people like Mike Eden was a VP at Pfizer. He's one of the biggest pharma whistleblowers in the world. But you look up his Wikipedia page and it's been adulterated to say, oh, he's a terrible person. Look him up on other search engines that haven't been corrupted and you'll find out who he really is. And he's an absolutely fantastic scientist, long-term pharma guy. There's so many incredibly qualified scientists and doctors who've come out and explained all of this. The things have been sequenced. For instance, what was passed by the FDA is not what was actually given out to the population. They changed the mechanism of production to have it run through E. coli, because you can mass produce it a lot more effectively if you use E. coli to do it. So they changed the mechanism of production, which should have meant they had to get another approval from the FDA. They never bothered with that. And they also inserted an SV40 promoter into the sequence that they actually used. That wasn't in what they gave the FDA, but they put that into the sequence that they actually put out to people. An SV40 promoter facilitates the transmission of the mRNA across the nuclear membrane, where it will then transfect into the genome. So this was deliberate, that they created it specifically to transfect into the genome. Then you become a spike protein factory forever. So people have constantly circulating spike protein. Spike protein is cytotoxic. It will be slicing up the insides of your blood vessels. It causes clotting for that reason. So it causes heart attacks and strokes. It causes massive inflammation of the heart muscle, myocarditis, pericarditis, crosses the blood-brain barrier, causes lymphatic infiltration into the brain and brain inflammation. It attacks various organs. It accentuates autoimmune disease. It causes infertility. It causes... The list of adverse events is insane. It's pages and pages long. And Pfizer actually submitted that before the vaccine rollout. They knew it was going to cause all these things, but they have immunity. They have absolute immunity under the PrEP Act. They cannot be taken to task for this. So, and there was actually a case brought by, I think it was Brooke Rollins, I think her name was. She had actually been working in a Pfizer, a lab that was subcontracted by Pfizer. And she was looking at this and going, but this is crap. You can't produce pharmaceuticals like this. This is horrendous. And so she became a whistleblower, and she actually took a legal case against Pfizer. And she lost because Pfizer said, well, of course this was corrupt, but we just delivered the corruption the government told us to. So this didn't even come from pharma. This came from the government. The government said to pharma, you produce this, and you're totally off the hook. You're not liable for anything. Just go ahead and do this. We don't really care how you do it, because we're really trying to kill people anyway. So this stuff is full of absolute garbage mRNA. It's also full of, at least 50% of every shot is contaminated with DNA, the DNA plasmids that come from the E. coli. They never bothered to clean it up. So you've got transfection of all kinds of DNA, mRNA fragments that do God only knows what, because if it's a fragment, you don't know what kind of protein it's going to code for. It might code for anything. It might be totally harmless, it might just gum up the works, or it might be something toxic. These things also disable the genome vigilance system. So genes like P53 and BRCA1 that are supposed to monitor the genome and suppress nascent cancers through the immune system, well, it takes those out. Hence turbocancers. The wave of turbocancers is only just beginning. And the risk is cumulative. Once you've had, it seems to be the third shot that pushes people's immune system over the edge, you go from an IgG3 response, which is fight that invader, to an IgG4 response, which is ignore that. IgG4 response is what you would want if you were trying to get rid of an allergy. You desensitize people by giving little bits of something until you train their immune system to ignore it. That's the response you get now. But you don't want to ignore a cytotoxic protein that's floating around your body all the time. It's just being allowed to do whatever it wants. It's causing premature aging. It's causing dementia, Parkinson's disease. Like, the range of things this is doing to people is insane. And you try and explain this to people. I could go through the entire pathophysiology of all of it. And people just say, oh, did you read that on Facebook? I was like, no, I didn't. I did an absolute deep dive into all of this. I listened to every scientist who's working on it, every doctor. I know all the treatments. I know why they work. I know how they work. There is so much information out there, but nobody's paying attention. And the media is absolutely saturating things with misinformation all the time. And then they say, we're the ones promoting misinformation. No, the misinformation is all coming from the authorities on every issue, on everything to do with the vaccines, everything to do with the war. You know, all the stuff that they want you to believe is wrong. And they're owned. The media is corporate. People say, oh, the liberal media. There is no liberal media. There isn't really conservative media either. There is transactional media. The media will do whatever the person giving them their paycheck wants them to do, whether that's liberal or conservative or anything else.
Well, we probably need to wrap up there because it looks like the recording is getting close to the end of the memory card.
So I'm making sense?
Lots to think about, right?
Well, yeah, food for thought, basically. There is so much more. I could go on for literally days. There is so much to this that people really need to know. Because if people come together, they can just say no. All it takes is for enough people to stand up and say, no. No, we're not taking your jobs. We're not going to go along with all these things that you want. We're not going to sign up for digital ID and get sucked into a CBDC system. We're just going to say no. And enough people do that, they fail instantly. But that's why they're pushing all the misinformation, so that people won't say no. But people really, really need to say no. It's very important.
Thank you.
The price of saying no is going to get much, much higher. I mean, the price for saying no to vaccines